So for our next session, I think we have everyone ready to go. It's building a compliant blockchain ecosystem in Asia Pacific, strategies and best practices for compliance, regulation and risk management. We have our moderator today is Alison Mackie, who is the Executive Director of NZTech, Rahul Advani, Policy Director at Ripple, Angela Ang, Senior Policy Advisor at TRM Labs, and Manan Vora, Senior Vice President Strategy and Operations at Liminal. Alison, we will need to change your name because it looks like you and Angela are sharing the same title there. So I'll do my best to change that.
Yeah, I try to change it too, but I don't know what happened with my Zoom link.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm so sorry, ladies. I will leave you to it in the background. I'm going to try and change your titles for you. But yeah, I'll hand the stage over and fix up those glitches.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So this is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about regulations and compliance. Probably a really weird topic to love, but I have so many great speakers today. So starting off, we have Rahul Advani from Ripple, Angela Ang from TRM Labs, possibly me too at the moment, who knows, and then Manan Vora from Liminal. So thank you guys all for joining us. We have a very short session. It's a really big meaty topic. So I'm just going to go straight into it with Manan, talking about risk management and the impact to compliance. So starting off, can you kind of delve into the current impacts of risk management and on compliance in the blockchain space, especially around the APAC region?
No, absolutely. So I think to be fair, right, like risk management is not only important for like blockchain, but I think risk management is important for any organization in any industry. But what makes it really special in an industry like blockchain is because the risk landscape is continuously evolving. And without risk management, I don't think an organization can keep up and make sure that they are in compliance with everything that's changing around, right? And which is why you need risk management, which is why you need like a framework. And to give you some context, right, when we talk about risks, we are not only talking about your typical risks that come to your mind when you're talking about like blockchain, like it's not only financial fraud or money laundering or data security and stuff like that, right? But what makes it really special is that there is multiple departments in a blockchain organization who could do things in a wrong way, which could actually lead to non-compliance for the organization, and the consequences could be significant. And again, to give you some examples, right, you could be in sales and you could be talking to customers and you could be like soliciting customers, which is probably against regulations. Or you could be in marketing and you would not be aware of the advertisement guidelines around blockchain. You could lead your organization into non-compliance. You could be in HR and you could be in recruitment and you could be hiring senior folks, and there could be rules regulations around fit and proper candidates, and you might not be aware. So these are, I mean, you could be in, I can go on, and you could be in like finance, and you could do like probably invest in tokens that are not allowed from a regulatory perspective, etc. You could breach capital requirements or liquidity requirements, right? So what risk management really does is it brings in a framework to help you identify, assess, and like put all of the risks in one place. Once you've done that, you're in a position to really identify how can you take measures to mitigate these risks. And then once you have that in place, you can, as an organization, continuously monitor this. Update is to make sure that you're not going wrong anywhere. That's not to say that by this you will never be in non-compliance, but I think this reduces your possibility of non-compliance significantly. And this we're especially seeing in a region like APAC, where new regulations are coming every day as we speak, and regulators are really it could be the MAS, it could be Hong Kong, it could be India, and everyone's coming up, learning from each other, and regulators are also being very proactive now. And just to give you context, like MAS has issued multiple guidelines, OSTRAC has issued guidelines. So what this does is you need to make sure that you read these guidelines, you bring them and incorporate them into your risk management framework and continuously monitor them. And which is why this eventually has a very significant impact on compliance, especially in a industry like blockchain.
Gosh, you made that sound so much more, a little bit complicated, isn't it? Oh, that's the thing. It can be really fragmented across the board, but every company and everything is such a unique use case when it comes to risk management and compliance. So it's almost like we need like a board of advisors across APAC or each, region itself that isn't quite a regulator almost, isn't it? So what do you think some best practices could be for maintaining like a robust compliance risk management strategy within a company, do you think?
So I think we need to just go back to the basics and not try to be like very creative when it comes to risk management, right? And if I was like probably designing this, this is how I would start. You need to take like a top-down view of your business, and first thing is to really understand your model and what you're doing, and understanding the jurisdiction that you are operating in. Once you have a good sense of what you're doing and the rules that you're playing with, what you really need to do is like sit down and do a top-down approach and identify and assess. So I think the first step should be to do risk assessment once you've understood your company, your product, your jurisdiction. Once you've done risk assessment, you can this will basically allow you to like identify all risks, so you can just like plot them down in a framework. And framework again doesn't need to be really fancy. All it needs to do is ensure that you're capturing every risk. Against that risk, what you really need to do is plot departments and assign like a risk owner, right? So this, like I said, the risk could be that you're advertising in a certain way and your marketing team might not even know that you're sort of breaching compliance or guidelines that are there specifically for blockchain industries. And this is important because Web3 is a very new space, right? So an organization is not necessarily hiring marketing leaders or other department heads only from other Web3 space. These could be individuals who are in a completely different industry, automobile for all right? And they would be playing by completely different rules out there. So when they're coming in here, it sort of becomes very important that you have a framework in place. So I think the idea is you put all of that together, you identify all of the measures that you can take to mitigate those risks. You can call them like controls. Once you put that in place, your risk comes down to a very acceptable level that the organization is like ready to take. Like, it's important to remember, you cannot like eliminate risks. All you can do is mitigate them to like bring down to a very acceptable level. Then what you do is like continuously have a program in place to like just keep monitoring it, keep reviewing it, and I think you should be fine. A few things that people really organizations really, very basic things that they don't do is like, one thing is you need to have a person. It could be someone from the legal or the compliance team, but there needs to be a process of wherever you're trying to do something. For example, you're in product and you're developing a feature, and you might not appreciate that you're actually breaching some compliance or some regulatory law, because this is a feature that you simply cannot offer. You're trying to offer like staking with varied returns, and you could be considered as a capital management company. So what you really need to do as an organization is make sure as a process you're talking to legal compliance folks within your organization. There needs to be like regular syncs between different departments to just make sure that when you're doing this, you're just making sure that you're in compliance with everything that you're doing. And I think if you do this, you should really be good. And I think last two things, which is again not very unique only to blockchain, but I think very important to stress, is that the tone really should come from the top. There needs to be a culture of risk management. There needs to be a clear communication to everyone in the organization that it is not okay to be not in compliance. We're trying to build an organization, and we're trying to actually build an industry that is pretty new, and which is why we're going to have instances where you might inadvertently lead to like non-compliance. But there needs to be continuous communication, education, and training to everyone that it is not one department's responsibility. It's like everyone's responsibility to make sure we're in compliance. So I think if you do that framework, I think you should be good.
I love that. That was perfect. I love the bird's eye view approach to a framework as well, because everything's moving so fast, and we're like little baby industry. And that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Manan, for that. So Rahul, we're going to move to you. So we're going to be talking about the global regulatory and compliance landscape. So looking global. So what do you think, with the global mindset on, what do you think our regulatory and compliance landscape is evolving in response to our industry growth?
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, so if we rewind to maybe 5 years ago, when blockchain and digital asset markets became increasingly active, Regulators around the world assess money laundering and terrorist financing risks as the key areas of concern. So this led to the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, publishing their guidance for a risk-based approach to virtual assets and virtual asset service providers in 2019. That guidance has since been updated to include additional areas, including stablecoins, DeFi, NFTs. And since then, the FATF has produced, I think, 3 reviews on the implementation of its standards, the most recent being just 2 days ago on the 27th of June. Now, with the rapid growth in scale and complexity of digital asset activity since then, we've seen other risks surface. And we've seen that, with the events over the past year or so. And recent market developments have also exposed the risks arising from the increasing interconnectedness within the digital asset ecosystem, as well as between the digital asset ecosystem and the traditional financial system. So while digital asset markets are not yet systemic in nature, the increasing institutional interest and participation could lead to the markets becoming systemic. So global regulatory bodies have turned their attention to such risks over the past year or so. Such risks include consumer protection, retail investor safeguards, market integrity requirements, business conduct requirements, and there's also special attention being given to the cross-border nature of digital asset markets. So the Financial Stability Board, or the FSB, consulted on the international regulation of crypto asset activities. I think it was in December 2022. We expect those consultation conclusions, sometime over 2023. The International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO, has an ongoing consultation, I think, till the end of next month, on policy recommendations for crypto and digital asset markets. Additionally, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors are looking to establish standards for a global digital asset regulatory framework, and we expect initial proposals around September of 2023. So we expect that the global regulatory bodies will continue to develop frameworks over the next year or so, but it's very clear that a risk-based approach to regulating the sector will be key, and a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. There's a clear need for a comprehensive and nuanced regulatory framework that treats different actors in the digital asset space according to their own risk profiles.
Yeah, that's right at the top of my mind at the moment. I'm having conversations with different art galleries, and they may not realize that they have to now deal with KYC or AML. And it's tricky, but there's one thing I do want to touch on is the idea of different regulatory hubs and the relationship between government and our industry. And do you see that there are blocks towards creating sound regulatory frameworks coming from a government side, because they may not have the same insights that us within the industry do? So I kind of want to touch on that and your perspective on it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't think we're at that stage just yet. I think jurisdictions are looking at how to implement regulatory frameworks. But what we are seeing is jurisdictions using their voice at a global level. So, for example, India currently has the G20 presidency, and they're using this presidency to raise the issue of a global framework for crypto assets. Similarly, Japan is very active at the G7 level, and they're using their voice at the G7 level to, again, raise the need for a global consistent regulatory framework. So while I don't think we have that consistency in terms of blocks of, or groups of jurisdictions just yet, I think what we're seeing is jurisdictions raise their voices saying, hey, we need a global framework that's clear, consistent, and risk sensitive. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next year or so, is individual jurisdictions taking the lead to provide some clarity at the global level.
Excellent. So what do you think regulators need in terms of understanding minimum standards are met from Web3 companies? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so it's very clear that it's essential for there to be global minimum standards. What we don't want to see is a race to the bottom or fragmentation, right? We don't want different approaches across the globe. So, the key to that is for authorities to cooperate and coordinate with each other, both domestically and internationally. We forget sometimes that there's multiple regulators within a jurisdiction sometimes, but also at the international level, to ensure efficient and effective communication, information sharing, and consultation in order to encourage consistency of regulatory outcomes. Global multilateral bodies that I mentioned, such as the FATF, IOSCO, FSB, G20, will play a very important role in fostering such cooperation. But I also believe that mutual recognition of global, of foreign frameworks could also lead to a level playing field globally, and that will support the growth and development of the ecosystem. Now, I don't want to use the word equivalence or passporting because that has different connotations, based on different jurisdictions, but more of a mutual recognition. And we've seen these exist for traditional financial institutions and traditional financial infrastructures. But I will caveat that in making such determinations, you need to follow a principles-based approach, right? You can't try to compare regulations line by line. That's going to be an exercise in futility. What you need to look at is the overall principle. Does the jurisdiction's framework meet that principle? And if so, should it be considered to be, some sort of mutual recognition of that?
Excellent, thank you for that. When you were speaking, it kind of popped into my mind. So the Reserve Bank of New Zealand have been doing this series of looking into private innovation of money and CBDCs and all that sort of stuff. And they keep saying that they want to have the same risk, same regulation sort of framework. And I kind of sit back and I'm like, oh, I don't know if that quite works in the stable coin or CBDC space compared to traditional money forms. So that's, I think, is something that we need to keep having that discussion on is, should it be same risk, same regulation, or should we think about it all separately? Okay, Angela, I want to move to you to look at the APAC landscape. So do you want to give us a quick overview of what's happening in our little area of the world in APAC?
Well, excuse me, it's actually not so little. One breath APAC, you're actually covering 20 to 30 countries, depending on your definition. So it's difficult to cover it all in a few minutes, but I'll try and do it justice. So I think, generally, we are seeing a blockchain ecosystem that's abuzz with innovation. Any cutting edge innovation you can think of on the global stage, we see it here. And we're also seeing encouragingly TradFi engaging with the blockchain sector. For example, DBS Bank in Singapore was the first bank to actually establish a digital asset exchange here. And there's also activity from the global banks like JP Morgan and Standard Chartered in the region. So I think there's a very positive direction of travel there. Of course, the elephant in the room, the industry is grappling with regulation, as my fellow panelists have alluded to earlier. And there are some growing pains here, I think, as regulators and the industry are kind of learning how each other think and how to actually engage with each other constructively. But that said, I do think that we're on an upward spiral in most parts of the region. And generally, from the regulatory perspective, there's a good direction of travel in the sense that we do see a willingness to engage and partner with the industry to get regulation right. And there's also an acknowledgement of the need to balance oversight and innovation. Regulators in APAC, generally the intention is to set guardrails, yes, but not at the expense of totally killing growth and innovation in most countries here. And there's also an understanding, encouragingly, as Rahul alluded to, that crypto does have unique characteristics that require a more nuanced approach. Same risk, same activity, same regulation, but you need to kind of design that in a way that takes into account the unique characteristics of the underlying technology. So I can't cover every market, but I do want to highlight kind of two key players in the space here in Asia Pacific. The names will be unsurprising, Singapore and Hong Kong, because these have been long regarded as financial hubs in the regions. And we do see regulators in both countries engaging with quite positively. Of course, the regulatory bar is set high, and I think both the MAS as well as the Hong Kong SFC and HKMA have kind of said that we're not going to lower the bar in order to kind of welcome or grow the sector. But if you want to develop your business in our financial center, then this is the kind of level of compliance that we expect. But at the same time, they are engaging with the industry to say, how do we implement this in a way that makes sense, right? And also in terms of key issues, for example, debanking, which we all know is a hot topic in Australia right now. Hong Kong and Singapore regulators have kind of engaged with the industry, brought the banks and the crypto businesses to the table to kind of talk through, what are the concerns on both sides and how can we move forward in a constructive way. So I think it is very much the posture. In terms of the letter of regulation, we will see a lot of similarities globally, and that is a good thing. But I think it's the posture of the regulators and how they kind of engage with the industry. And I think that's generally kind of very happening very positively in APAC. I do cover kind of 15 APAC countries digital asset developments on LinkedIn. So if you want to kind of look at some of the other markets in a bit more detail, Christy, I did share that link, that first link earlier. Feel free to give it a read. But I think generally in APAC, the direction of travel is very positive, and we're seeing kind of good traction and upward spiral between industry and regulators.
Yeah, I don't want to sound a little bit too biased, but I'm currently trying to work on the deep banking problem in New Zealand and trying to get all the different government industries together to create a regulatory framework within blockchain NZ, within New Zealand itself. And I think we are in such a unique position because I have all the, connections to all the banks and all the government agencies and industry that it's kind of like a perfect storm. And I think if you were in America, there's no way that we could do that. But then I can, lean on Amy Rose, I can lean on Steve Vallis for input to help me out with it. And I think we're very lucky in that space that we have these connections and we're all kind of in it together. So really, really appreciate what you're saying there. So what do you think the next steps should be taking when we're establishing these standards and looking at it from a broader APAC perspective to be compliant?
Yeah, I think, regulators, when they set out, they set out the requirements, it's very principle-based. For example, you should comply with the travel rule. You should ensure that you're doing due diligence and email kind of KYC when onboarding customers and ongoing transaction monitoring and all that. But what does that really look like? If you want to have a kind of leading or future-proof compliance program, I think one thing that's very unique to the blockchain and crypto ecosystem is that is the kind of pace of innovation. And I think one thing we need to recognize when designing compliance programs is that today, blockchain, it's no longer just about Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's really an entire blockchain ecosystem. And shameless plug, TRM Labs just dropped our illicit crypto ecosystem report yesterday, hot off the press. And I think Christy has shared the link in the chat earlier. And one of the things that we found was that, 6 years ago, 2/3 of crypto hack volume was on Bitcoin. Today, or last year, Bitcoin accounted for just under 3% of crypto hacks. And, Bitcoin is accounting for just 19% of illicit volume. So there's this whole other ecosystem of tokens that you need to kind of look at and ready your compliance program for as well, in order to make sure that we are staying ahead of the bad actors. And I think the other theme that I would highlight is that, kind of in the initial phase when regulators were engaging with crypto, they were using tools from their existing toolbox in terms of what were the kind of regulatory levers that they had existing. But right now, I think regulators are kind of shifting to having at different paces in different countries, but kind of generally there's a shift towards a more bespoke and targeted focus on something that is crypto and blockchain specific. So I think that is the other thing that we need to be mindful of, and it's a good development really. So there will be, I think, more kind of like higher expectations with regards to compliance, and kind of more specific requirements on crypto players and crypto businesses that the industry needs to be ready for. So that's kind of broadly what we see happening. Again, we touch on this in more detail in our compliance white paper that we released a couple of months ago. But basically, there is a kind of a shift to a second age of digital assets compliance, where we're not just looking at technical compliance or ticking the checkboxes in terms of complying with certain requirements, but regulators are also looking at effectiveness. Their understanding their understanding of crypto is growing, and they're going to be more equipped to assess effectiveness of compliance programs, and not just looking at how their regulators are ticking the boxes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I just want to answer something in the Q&A, put it out to the panel. This is by Anonymous. Thank you, Anonymous. Hi, I was wondering, are there any websites that provide information and stats around risk management, compliance, and regulatory matters in relationship to blockchain in different sectors? Does anyone have any input into that, or can link to people in the chat?
Can I say trmlabs.com?
Yeah, the TRM Labs.
Yeah. I think the compliance white paper does have some, put forth some a framework for how crypto businesses can think about their compliance program on a global stage as well. Yeah, so hopefully, Anonymous will find that helpful.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to the panel now for the last few minutes. So this is just bringing us all together. How can blockchain entities in the APAC region balance the need for compliance with the desire for innovation? And I know that some of us are really risk averse and we want to be compliant, and then some people just want to bulldoze and be innovators and change the game. What are your thoughts?
I can go first. So I think one experiment that is really working very well and that we're seeing play out in India as we speak now is a regulatory sandbox, right? So there is a Telangana government in India which is come up with a Web3 regulatory sandbox. So what this is really allowing is creating an ecosystem where you have people working directly with regulators without really worrying a lot about breaking any rules or regulations, and just go ahead and innovate. What this does is it allows Web3 folks to really innovate without really worrying about the regulatory breaches. It also allows regulators to get a very deep insight into the innovation that's happening in Web3 and what are the rules that we should really come up with, so that our broader objective of making sure compliance is in place is achieved without really coming up with arbitrary roadblocks for Web3 folks in innovations. I think I'm a part of the regulatory sandbox, so I know firsthand how important this has been for the ecosystem here. So I think this is something, probably a strategy that can be adopted by other regions as well.
I would just add that public-private partnerships and discussions are very important, right? The industry is moving so fast. That's very important for regulators to know what's happening and to be educated on developments. And we're very lucky to be in a region where regulators are willing to have this discussion. You can go to the MES, you can go to the HKMA, you can go to the RBA and ASIC and have this discussion in an open forum or a private forum. Shameless plug, Angela and I will be in Bangkok next week. We're doing a Ripple TRM Labs Thailand Policy Summit. And that's exactly what that aspires to do, is bring regulators, policymakers, industry, academia, the entire ecosystem into a room and just have free and frank discussions on what developments are and what the direction of travel should be.
Yeah, and I mean, these are excellent points. And I would just round up by saying it's a matter of perspective. So I think it's important to keep the perspective that compliance and growth are not mutually exclusive, but they can be mutually reinforcing. And well-implemented compliance can be a competitive advantage. I think there has been a debt of trust following the events of 2022 in the ecosystem. Let's be honest. And when you say that, I want to learn from that. And we're here to build for the long term. We're here to raise the bar in terms of risk management, governance, and compliance, and not just to please regulators, but because we know that's good for the business. I think that's good for business.
Yeah, that's true. I think also, I know we just touched on the debanking issue, but I feel like there's like a difference between like government regulations, but then, you may be able to be super compliant when it comes to all the regulations and all that sort of stuff. But then you come to the banks and they just don't want to touch you because all the risk goes onto them. So whatever a customer does, doesn't matter what the business does. If a customer does something that isn't in line, then the bank is then liable for that. And so I kind of want to think of, like, what's your perspective on the debanking issue and how can we kind of build those relationships better? educate banks or set up systems in place with them and to show that, we're compliant, give us a bank account, or don't debank us? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yep, I can take a stab at it. Oh, sorry, Manan.
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, I think, ultimately people fear the unknown. It's human nature. So we need to kind of engage. And I think, in the jurisdictions where the regulators are almost, dare I say, forcing this engagement, I think that's where we will see conversations start to happen. I think for example, the Hong Kong regulators literally wrote a letter to the banks to say, do not be afraid to onboard crypto businesses. I think I think it takes time, but there needs to kind of have this dialogue, and regulators do play an important role in really kind of advancing that conversation.
Manan, do you want to add to that?
So I think the only view I have is, right, I think it's not like we probably in some places we started, we put the wrong foot forward, right? So we started like advocating Web3 as be your own bank, or, we're here to take over banks. And so that narrative that started off really initially made the banks pretty hostile towards the industry. Of course, there are these real risks around AML and money laundering and all, but that's not to say that these are risks that have come with blockchain. Money laundering has far existed before blockchain, right? So it wasn't a risk that is unique to blockchain. Of course, there are ways to do it, but I think that initial mindset about like being hostile towards your and you're here to create your own currency and you're here to like destabilize the whole that was why they used to be hostile. A lot of times we talk with bankers, and by the way, like some of these Web3 businesses are really good customers for bankers, right? Like the amount of business that they bring in is really good. So I think they've started appreciating the compliance efforts that we're taking overall as an industry. I think we've been doing a good job, and we should be persistent about like educating and talking more about what Web3 is all about, what are the different use cases, what are the compliance. I think every serious Web3 business has invested in compliance. So that's gone a long way. And now we're seeing with what's happening at Hong Kong and the regulator really asking banks to come in together. Similarly, we're experiencing extremely good ecosystem in ADGM as well. So the regulators, FSR, has done a very good job of bringing banks together. We're seeing that open up in India as well. So I think it's a matter of like undoing what was done before, and a matter of bankers getting to know the Web3 space a lot more.
I couldn't agree more. Rahul, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just to echo what Angela and Manan have already said, but just to also highlight that I think, what's important is for regulators and banks to take a technology agnostic approach, right? The technology is not the issue. The technology is just a tool, right? It's the activity that could be a concern. And, as Manan said, money laundering has existed long before blockchain and digital assets. So it's important to look at the activity, not the technology.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. And I'm glad you guys got to do a little bit of a plug for you both. I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for myself, actually, because I think I've got 2 minutes left. So I'm actually trying to sort out the debanking issue. I had a meeting yesterday with one of our banks, nameless, because I can't say anything, but I'm really excited to see where we go. And I agree that as industry and companies, we're starting to take this very seriously. We want to be compliant. We want to be good actors. So hopefully, if we can work it out in New Zealand and my plans go ahead, I'm so happy to explore that with the rest of the wider APAC region to sort this out, because, we shouldn't be demonized for what happened in the past or, the original white paper. And I know we've changed a lot since then, but I just want to say thank you guys so much. This is an ongoing conversation, but it's a really important one. So thank you, Blockchain Australia and Blockchain Week, for hosting us. Amy Rose, off to you.
Thank you so much, Alison, Rahul, Angela, and Manan. This is a fantastic conversation. It is on the very top of our minds at the moment. And as we move and innovate and I guess mature as an industry, we'll move through these stages and eventually it'll just be a nothing burger, I guess. It'll just become, or remember how we had to get through all of those hurdles as an industry to mature and just become the beast that we shall be.